العرش العظيم توفانا مؤمنين صادقين والحقنا بالصالحين وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والله جميعا إن شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وربنا زدنا علما آمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكيها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها مولاها. So today we're going to talk about an episode where magic was done on the Prophet ﷺ, and this is actually something that is mentioned in the Surah of the Prophet ﷺ. I wanted to actually begin with something which is that people who study the Quran and they study tafsir, one of the things that's known among the sciences of the Quran is Asbab al-Nuzul. Asbab al-Nuzul it does not apply to every single surah and every single ayah of the Quran, but there were some instances in those 23 years of the Nubuwah where a situation happened, right? An event occurred. And then in response to that, that situation became a sabab. And in response to that, ayat were sent down to address that situation. So Asbab al-Nuzul, and there are tafsir written about, and they mention certain ayahs, this happened, and so in response to this ayah and this surah was revealed. And so what happened in this incident that I will share with you, the response to that were the the two surahs that are the surahs of ta'awud, of seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those are Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas. Surah Al-Falaq specifically is seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from magic and from ayn, right, from nazar, like somebody who doesn't always have a bad intention, but because they look at you in a way and it is a very admirable kind of a look, sometimes it can cause harm, but ultimately it is anything that happens with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Surah Al-Nas is a protection from alladhi yuwaswisu, what the jinn says, alladhi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, the waswasa of the jinn. So you have falaq, which protects from magic and from ayn. You have nas, which protects from jinn. And these are called the al-mu'awwidatan. I'm not saying it right, I don't know. So anyhow, so the way the story goes is that there were, even though many of the Jews from Medina, the Banu Nadir and Banu Qaynuqa, there were some residual Jews still living in Medina, and Jews even existed in Medina in the time of Umar ibn Khattab. And there was one man whose name was Labid, and Labid was an expert magician. He was an expert magician. And so it is not known who it was, it is not mentioned, and Rasulullah ﷺ did not launch an investigation on who was the source of this, but somebody came up to Labid, somebody. It could have been from the Munafiqun, it could have been a mushrik from Medina, it could have been another Jew from a mushrik from Mecca, it could have been another Jew from Medina, we don't know. But someone came up to Labid and gave him a bribe. And the favor that he wanted, the hit that he wanted to put on Labid, is that he wanted magic to be done on the Prophet ﷺ, hopefully to remove him. And so Labid needed something that was from the Prophet. So this is interesting. So to make that spell work, some DNA is needed. Right? Interesting. So he was able to acquire some hair of the Prophet ﷺ, that sometimes when you brush your hair, if you have a thick head of hair, you brush your hair, so a lot of hair comes off in the comb. And so those hair were brought to him. His daughter was also a magician. And so they tied 11 knots in the strands of hair. Knots in hair are impossible to undo. It's not something thick, it's very thin. So 11 knots were tied in the hair, and then his daughter, she breathed, whatever spells, and nafathat, a woman who blows. And so she blew it on the strands of these hair, and these hair were then thrown into a well, and so the magic began to take effect, even on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So what happened to the Prophet? The first thing that the Prophet happened to the Prophet that he began to experience is that his memory began failing him. He couldn't remember things that he had done, his short-term memory, he couldn't remember those things. Number two, he began to imagine things that he hadn't done. Things that he hadn't done, he thought that he had done those things. So his memory was losing him. He was having some kind of a hallucinatory episode or imagining things that he hadn't done. And then he also lost his appetite. Anytime food was brought to him, Rasulullah did not eat very much anyway. Sometimes he didn't eat for days. But when food was brought to him, he did not feel like eating. So this is clearly somebody who's very sick, physically very sick. And so he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure him. And so one day the Prophet ﷺ had a dream, and in his dream he heard two people talking to each other. Oh, did you hear what happened to him? Magic was done to him. And in the conversation that the two people were having, the discussion that they were having is that magic had been done to the Prophet ﷺ. When he woke up, Jibreel came to him alayhi salam, and Jibreel confirmed that dream, that yes, this is what you heard in the dream is exactly what happened to you. And so Jibreel also told him the location of the well in which these strands of hair of the Prophet ﷺ had been thrown in. And so Rasulullah ﷺ sent Ali to the well, telling him to write over it the two surahs, these one with the tongue, right? The Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas. And so when it was recited over the knots, it was recited over the recovered strands of hair, the knots began to undo themselves, because it was not something that you can physically undo, but because of the power of the surah, the knots began to undo themselves. And so the translation of Surah Al-Falaq, which everybody knows, is to say, I take refuge in the Lord of Al-Falaq, the daybreak, from the evil of that which He has created, and from evil of dusk, when it dims into the night, the sunset, and from the evil of the woman who breathes upon knots, and from the evil of the envier when he envies. So magic and hasad, jealousy, envy, that because of which someone can do the ayn, right, the nazar, the evil eye. And the second was Surah Al-Nas, which is protection from the jinn. I take refuge in the Lord of men, the King of men, the God of men, from the evil of the stealthy whisperer who whispers into the breasts of men. He does waswasa into the breasts of men, from the jinn and from men. Because there are two types of shayateen. Like one type of a devil is the jinn, made of fire, and sometimes people are also devils, and so they can also cause a lot of evil. So Surah An-Nas is protection from these types of devils. Rasulullah had that well where his hair was thrown in. He had that well filled up, and he had another well dug next to it. He didn't want anybody else to use that well again, and another well was dug next to it. And finally, when the magician was exposed, Rasulullah asked him, was he had that man brought before him, and Labid confessed, yes, somebody bribed me, and I did magic upon you, and Rasulullah forgave him. And he never asked him, okay, who told you, who bribed you, was it munafiqun, was it mushrik, was it Yahud? He didn't care. The magic was done, the surahs were revealed, he was cured, he did not pursue an investigation, I want to find out who it is, I want to kill them. This was not the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Labid was forgiven, and whoever told him to do it was never caught and was never sought. So inshallah we'll stop here and continue from this point next week. Jazakumullahu khair. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Rasulil Kareem. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ما وزنت